I have one question about the tilings first. This mirror tiling you presented, I was wondering if you have a tiling for the left side, and if you mirror your tiles, your set of tiles, and make all the mirrors available as well, can that not cover the other half? Or why? Is there an easy answer to tell me that it doesn't work?
Well, in that case, you can also have a tiling where the left-hand side is not the same as the right-hand side. So if you must, on the left-hand side, you must allow everything, and then on the right-hand side, it must be the same as the left-hand side. So in your example, the left and the right are independent. So you must somehow like transfer the information across the mirror using these hidden local rules.
Maybe also about the Van tiles. It's always nice to hear mathematicians speaking about their science, because I get some kind of maybe ideas. So have these Van tiles been used to analyze like geographic data, like let's say existence of forest and the structure of the forest and so on? Like because when you have a geographic data, you have always like a surface. And then you often have like, you have something in here and nothing in here, so it's always like binary, often kind of a binary data, like these white tiles and these tiles with the circles. So could you, or is there some kind of an example, do you have in mind that using some kind of a geographical data, like remote sensing or so, someone could have shown that like the distribution of forests around the world somehow resemble Wang tiles or something like this? Do you have something in your mind that could be?
I have to say that I'm not aware, at least, this kind of a direct application to geography.
Right.
So maybe the issue might be that if you try to model geography with Wang tiles, because there is so the Wang tiles can only record local constraints. So you would get the constraint like if you have a very thick forest here, then you cannot have a desert next to it. So you only get this kind of a very local information about your geography.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that could be useful for something.
Right.
Other questions? Maybe I can continue with the Wang tiles now that we started. I'm a cell biologist and I have a medical background, so I was very fascinated by you saying Wang tiles can be somehow formed by DNA.
Yes.
So can you explain a bit more in detail, what does that mean?
Yes, so how the construction of Wang tiles with DNA goes is that so from DNA strands you can, or as far as I understand it, you can build these structures which have like a central thing, like a circular thing, and then 4 strands of DNA coming out of the central part. And each of these 4 strands, they are single strands, and they have some sequence of these base pairs, and they can only bind to a similar or the counterpart on the other structure. And so these 4 things represent the edges, and the colors are represented by these sequences of base pairs. And then they form sort of a grid structure inside the whatever substance they are floating in.
Okay, I have this kind of the same topic. So, like I think in your examples, all the constraints were kind of absolute. Like you could, but I mean, in this DNA example, one could think that there's like probabilities there more.
Yes.
But does that work also with the tiles, or is it?
Yes. So there is a model for this. where you have different strengths for the constraints. And in this model where you sort of construct or you build a tiling starting from some finite patch, and then you add new tiles on the borders. And depending on how strong your bonds is, you first add a tile at the border where the bond is the strongest, so it wants to tile there first. And then if you don't have these strong bonds, you add sometimes with the weaker bonds and so on. And this system has also been shown if you have enough complexity, if you have enough different strengths, it's also very hard to analyze.
Should I back a question maybe for Paulina? So thanks for your presentation. Like, it was quite interesting for me personally because I've been vegan for many years. And I was actually, I mean, I'm also part in some Facebook groups, and once in a while there's like comments popping up where people say that, well, there are some sort of rumors that you might eat some algae or something like this, and like seaweed or something like this, yeah. But and this would also supplement B12, but apparently it's not the case.
It depends.
Okay, because I was now wondering, because you were showing those mushrooms, and you said that, okay, either there might be some B12 within plant-based foods because it was contaminated or fermented.
Yes.
So now I'm wondering, okay, so is it enough to eat mushrooms? Or
Well, you'd have to eat a lot in order to get enough B12 from mushrooms. So I wouldn't say that you can treat them as a source of B12. And perhaps you're referring to spirulina?
might be. I never believed in that.
So yeah, and you shouldn't, because it was shown that there's actually pseudovitamin produced by these algae, so they are not a source of B12. However, it seems that in roasted nori that you use in sushi, which, well, you can eat some of, there's some B12, but still not enough. So as a vegan, you probably know that you need to supplement.
How about beer?
I was hoping that it could be my next project, but not yet. It's possible that when you have some wild fermentation, then maybe there can be some beer, but some B12, but not yet. All other vitamins, though, yes.
Maybe about the same subject, and maybe I'm thinking way too difficult or way too expensive, but how, and I don't know anything about plants, but how about genetically engineering the way these bacteria make B12 into plants to have these plants produce B12 and then having it in this kind of food? I don't know anything about plant genetics, so I don't know how it works.
Okay, sure. The only problem is that the biosynthesis of vitamin B12 requires over 20 genes, so it wouldn't be easy to modify plants to produce B12. It's, I think, a lot more attainable to actually introduce the B12 making bacteria and go from there. And still, as I mentioned, we have the problem that we're not allowed to add cobalt, which is the central atom in the molecule, so there's a hurdle anyway.
So let's continue the list. How about sauerkraut or sourdough bread, for example? Are these?
It really depends, because if they are made in controlled conditions where you use some starter bacteria, then no. But when you have some wild fermentation, it's possible. Actually, there was a study where in Germany they showed that there was some B12 in sauerkraut, but I wouldn't rely on it, because you cannot assume that there will be B12.
So I'd like to ask a question
Sure.
from you. So it's a bit more about biology, but you told us that so B12 is only produced by these certain microbes, and plants don't need it for anything. So why do these bacteria need it? Why do they produce it?
For their They actually use it for different reasons, and different bacteria use it for different pathways. For example, in my bacteria, or my favorite bacteria. and Propionibacterium freudenreich, it's used in the same enzymes as in humans, so methylmalonyl coenzyme A mutase and methionine synthase. And actually, this B12 dependent methionine synthase is quite widespread. However, there are some bacteria that do not have it. They have the other version. But still, yeah, bacteria need it, and we need it, animals need it, plants don't.
Still a little bit about the same thing. So I think you showed us pictures about the food products that have B12. Mm-hmm. And I think there was like milk products, so cow, and then some fish and chicken. Mm-hmm. So do they all have it in their like gut, or do they get it from somewhere? And if they have it in their guts, we don't have it at all, or?
So it's It's actually quite a good question. Thank you. It's also quite complicated because it's, for example, in ruminants like cow, the bacteria in rumen produce B12, and that's how the cow gets it. But some other herbivores don't have multiple stomachs, and they cannot get it from the rumen. And so what they do is actually engage in coprophagy, which is, if some of you don't know, it's eating poop. So that provides them with various bacteria, and some of them provide them with B12. For us, because the transport of vitamin B12 is very complex. It starts from binding vitamin B12 in our saliva, and then it's bound by another transporter in our stomach, and then it's bound by another one in the intestine until it's uptaken in the upper intestine and then transferred through the cells. We could not get it from our gut bacteria because our gut bacteria want it as well. So they compete for it. So that's why we need this very specific transport that gives it to us and not our bacteria. I hope that answers your question.
It's maybe complicated everything.
Yes, I really simplified it.
Yes, I know. Go ahead.
Hey, I have a question about contemporary legal history. So, to what extent is climate change an issue in contemporary legal history?
Well, it can be, depending on your topic. It's as I said, there's a wide range of topics, and certainly that can be one of them. I'm not really aware of a study about it, but I've been actually thinking about it since I think that science should try to solve our largest problems, and I've been thinking what could legal historians do about it. But I don't really have an answer for you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So thinking of regulations and these kind of issues.
Sure. Of course, law and the way we give rules and have rules and obey or disobey rules have to do with the climate change. Of course, it's part of human activity, but as a discipline, I'm not aware how legal history has approached the subject.
Wouldn't the study be why basically nothing was done legally while it was already known in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s that we were causing this climate change?
Sure. Yeah, one could do that. Well, but if we just kind of brainstorm about my future project, then I've been thinking that there are other global problems that we have dealt with through law and international law, and for example, the lead in fuels. We've gotten rid of it in I think most of the world. I think there's some countries left that they use it as an additive, but it's a global disaster as far as I've understood. If we would have continued using lead, and if we all would breathe that as an aerosol, but through regulation we have gotten rid of the problem. So there is also kind of this answer part in law and the decisions that we can make. So perhaps that could be a good question to pose, why certain problem enters the field of law and why certain does not, and what it takes for a problem to become an issue in legal regulation.
I would like to hear more about the normative aspect of legal history. So how do you see your role as a legal historian? Are you actively trying to find a moral in a history, or to find what should we learn from things, and give recommendations for the future? Is this normative aspect part of your field or not?
Well, I think it depends on the researcher. I don't think myself as being that normative. I think that the way I see it is that I lay out my conclusions and let the reader decide how he or she would act. But I personally, I don't think that you have to kind of that you have to be an activist when you write legal history. But sure, there's because we do research on topics that are many times very political. They are very current political issues. So you can see that some researchers, take sides in political issues and so on.
Thanks. One about the wang tiles. So have people tried to use like triangles for wang tiles? And what kind of properties do you get with triangles, like equilateral triangles?
Well, triangles and other like plane figures, they give a sort of similar properties as these squares, because usually you can arrange these triangles into squares. You take two triangles, it looks like a square. But it becomes more interesting and varied if you, instead of the two-dimensional surface, you take some more complicated space. You can take three-dimensional space and one cubes. You can take hyperbolic space with some weird tiles. You can take even more exotic spaces. And there you have many geometric phenomena which are not present in this two-dimensional case. So, for example, the conditions of being a periodic tiling are slightly different. So, in the two-dimensional case, if you have a tiling which is like periodic in one direction, you also have a tiling which is periodic in all directions. This is not true in three dimensions, and in other exotic spaces you have even weirder stuff happening with respect to periodicity.
Other questions?
I might actually have some half comment, half question to the legal history, like just the field of legal history, because I was like listening to you made me think from an ethnological point of view. It seems like an interesting field, because I guess law might also just show reactions to changes in society, that you have changes in society and then laws react to it. But at the same time, I'm then wondering if laws might actually also cause changes, like be at the first there's a decision, okay, now we forbid this and that actually leads to certain changes in society, or like, that's just like very blurry comments. I don't know, just some reflections. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the way I see it is that law is one of kind of it's one societal institution that we have. It's kind of a field of our society. We have other such fields: the economy, the religion, so on. So it's a study of that field of society. And the way I see it is that you should not kind of close the doors to these other fields of society, because there are still some legal researchers in other disciplines, mostly that kind of think of the law as a closed system, and they only think of, they have a set of sources that you can call legal sources, and then you operate with those sources, and it gives you a useful picture of the law if you're a judge making a decision, that a judge that has to rely on certain parameters in the decision. But if you want to understand the law, or if you want to understand society, then you have to kind of analyze those things that matter. You have to be critical in informing the source material and choosing the source material, and then kind of weave the interpretation and put the law in the right context, and then you will find something new about the law or the society. That's kind of the way I see it. And of course, it's, there's never a day zero in law. It's always the law comes from somewhere, and it always has some effects on back to society. So it's part of all that. So it was actually a really good question.
Just to continue on this, so you say society, but I have a feeling, this is a layman feeling, that somehow in jurisdiction this is still very much national policies. And is that because of the language of law is always national? So if you're talking about society, is that necessarily the Finnish society? Or is it, how general can it be? Or can you compare societies with different jurisdictions?
Yeah, comparative legal history is then, that could have been another topic of today. And kind of my researcher profile is very national in a way. My topics have been very national, but yet some of the causes of the changes that I analyze are international. And for example, my dissertation was the time when this kind of national wall was taken down, and we attached to the global system of finance. So. Current law is very international, transnational, and law has been around before the national states. The lawyers and the kind of law drafters, decision makers have always been aware of law of other places. So the processes are many times transnational. They don't necessarily follow the national borders. It just happens that we have a national state that enforces law.
Exactly. Yeah. But the smaller the globe gets, I guess the more global also this area gets.
Sure. And you can of course see in kind of like research trends. You can the kind of global changes also affect that. In the mid-90s, study of European law was in very much demand, and transnational issues are very hot topics these days.
And then it's also challenging, like you think about your question about aviation and climate change, and this can get very heated discussions politically.
Sure.
And so it's I guess as a researcher, then it's in a way it's nice to be in the middle of everything when things happen, and as a researcher you may also want to stay aside of the discussions, heated discussions of the day. I have the same problem. I work with cholesterol, and I certainly don't want to take a stand on where you get your cholesterol. It's it's one way to educate people, another way to do research.
The interesting question is, should we stay aside, or should we just get involved and actually actively work into getting the laws better? Because if we, working in research, working in the forefront, keep our mouth shut, then laws are going in directions that they shouldn't go.
Very good point. But it's also this thing. I mean, we all feel this. I mean, you can also engage yourself in very futile discussions and arguments, and it's both and. It's important to be active and to be involved, and then I mean, still keep your functionality.
Yeah, and perhaps not so much in legal history, but also in this discipline, it actually does affect on like the decisions. For example, I have to quote another or use an example used by another member of this club, Dr. Toni Malmien, who has done much work on the United States Supreme Court, and he has written on the decisions allowing gay marriages, where they used they based the decision on work by legal historians who had done their research on marriages in different cultures and different times and the rules governing those. So the Supreme Court kind of used that as a background to the decision. So actually this field does matter to legal decisions, and legal studies as such are kind of they're integrated in that source material that you make legal decisions. So it's kind of law is an object of study, but then you also affect the object of study. So in that way, kind of, it's very different to your fields. I mean, what you do as a researcher doesn't affect the way things are in the body with B12. You know, it's a different thing. Well, I mean, do they? I mean, you have the complex process of a human to obtain B12, but by studying it, you don't affect it.
No, but you could try to legally force plant-based food producers to actually fortify.
Yeah, sure.
And that's a topic I wouldn't want to touch.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, I guess we can thank all the speakers once more.